2015, so 7 years ago, one of the things that we put forward, and I remember saying this a whole bunch of times, attack politics, divisive politics, negative, stirring up of hate and fear and differences. The dirty secret is they work. Even back in 2015, they work to get you elected.
Even back in 2015.
You can do that. You can mobilize and get elected. It's just what we're seeing is that once you've used those methods to get elected, it becomes incredibly hard to govern responsibly for all citizens in bringing people together and getting big things done. Because once you start, churning up anger, it just feeds on itself. And if you're not continually throwing fresh raw meat at it,
right.
It will get away from you entirely.
Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing in Canada a certain number of people who stirred up that starting to have it sort of turn back against them a little bit.
First of all, I'm not saying this to be conspiratorial or like conspiratorial. I at first thought this was a deep fake. I'm trying to locate the entirety of this clip. I thought it was one of those deep fakes. If for nothing else, set aside the absolute insane gaslighting, the insane, I don't know if this is confession through projection or just publicly admitting and then realizing he's admitted more than he intended to admit, because he does say it specifically about himself in 2015. Set aside the tone, the tenor, I should say, his voice. Like, I was like, what's up with the vocal fry?
Well, when I got elected in 2015, so 7 years ago, one of the things that we put forward, and
like scratching his head, like everything about this. I'm just going to go to the chat and see if this is, I see FJT. I tried to make a joke, people said, what does FJT mean? And I was like, yeah, okay. This is too much.
I remember saying this a whole bunch of times. Attack politics, divisive politics, negative, stirring up of hate and fear and differences.
Those people are putting us all at risk. They're putting at risk their own children, and they're putting at risk our children. This is the guy now reflecting, pontificating on it's. I say it's divisive, not divisive, but I don't care about that. This is the guy pontificating on the politics of division.
The dirty secret is they work.
The dirty secret. It's not a dirty secret. It's a known secret. You're just the dirty person for employing it. I say that with full awareness of confession through projection, because I don't like Justin Trudeau. I don't say nice things about Justin Trudeau. I believe there's substantive critique, but I tend to try to draw the line between Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party as a political party and Canadian citizens at large. I tend not to fight with the citizens over the foibles of the leaders of their political parties.
Even back in 2015, they work to get you elected.
Sure, yeah.
You can do that. You can mobilize and get elected.
Exactly like he just did in 2021. Extremists, misogynists, racists, anti-science, anti-vaxxers. They take up place. How do we tolerate them? Listen to this guy talking about the perils of the very politics of division that he just stirred up, shoveled heap of gasoline onto within the last year. I guess it's more than a year now. Tabarnouche. It's more than a year ago of the last year.
It's just what we're seeing is that once you've used those methods to get elected, it becomes incredibly hard to govern responsibly for all citizens.
No poo-poo, Sherlock. We're off the swear words. I swore yesterday more than I should have. I'm going to go back to clean talk. No poo-poo, Sherlock. It becomes increasingly difficult to govern when you've alienated no less than 20% and maybe upwards of half the population. Yeah, it becomes very, very difficult to govern when you've called women who were vaccine, I'll say jab reticent, because they were afraid it might have an impact on their menstrual cycles, which it does, by the way. Spoiler alert, CTV caught up with the news. We're going to get there today. It becomes very difficult when you've demonized people who don't want the government telling them what goes in their body. Women who don't want the government telling them what goes in their body. Black Canadians who don't want the government telling them what goes in their body. Native, Indigenous, Latino, who have the same problems specifically because of what the government has been doing to these groups, to these citizens, to these demographics for the last 100+ years. Oh, he knows.
bringing people together and getting big things done. Because once you start, churning up anger, it just feeds on itself. And if you're not continually throwing fresh raw meat at it,
Right.
It will get away from you entirely.
Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing in Canada.
And he's realized, by the way, at this point, that's this whole like, holy crap, I've just described everything I've been doing. I need to find a way to put this blame on somebody else right now. That's what he does in the last section of this clip. Holy crap, I've just described my MO from 2015 to 2022. Now I've got to blame someone else and pass the buck onto somebody else. How do I do it? Here.
A certain number of people who stirred up that, starting to have it sort of turn back against them a little bit.
Maybe he is talking about himself. It's turning back against you, Monsieur Trudeau. And pas à peu près, comme on dit en français. Colis. Colin de bin. Let me bring up a super chat. I was watching the EMA meeting today. The balance is tipping against him having activated it. That is the Emergency Measures Act meeting today. It for anybody who doesn't know, you've been living under a rock or not, you're brand new to the channel. The Emergency Measures Act, when Justin Trudeau invoked it in February of, February of this year? It feels like a lifetime ago. In February, March, whenever it was February, he invoked it in February to violently suppress the Ottawa convoy protest. Justin Trudeau, the man who just the day before yesterday tweeted out how the Iranians' crackdown on peaceful protest and its treatment of women is a violation of human rights, intolerable. This is coming from the guy who literally invoked the Emergencies Act to violently suppress the most peaceful protests I'll go out and say Canada has ever seen, and possibly the world. January 6th, I don't think was defined by violence. I don't think it was an insurrection. I think it was a protest that got out of hand in certain pockets. Whether or not January 6th is defined by the violence that the media has defined it by, more or less up for grabs. The Ottawa protest was 3.5 weeks of the most peaceful, orderly protest, though I have ever seen in my life. Shoveling the sidewalk, salting the sidewalk, feeding the homeless, cleaning up the streets, cleaning up garbage. But there was honking. There was honking for 5 or 7 days at the beginning. Traumatized. Terrible. Justin Trudeau lectures Iran for cracking down on violent protests and abusing of female protesters in particular. Justin Trudeau violently cracked down, invoked the Emergency Measures Act. It is what followed the War Measures Act to violently suppress the most peaceful protest. In so doing, violently assaulted veterans, protesters, women. At one point, the RCMP accidentally discharged a tear gun canister at the leg of a credentialed journalist, point blank. Arrested Tamara Litch, detained her for 2.5 weeks on mischief charges before releasing her. This guy now is talking about the politics of division. It works so well. So now they're having the hearings as to whether or not it was justified to have invoked the Emergency Measures Act. And it's not going to go well. The RCMP has come out and confirmed that they weren't consulted. They wouldn't have asked for it. They didn't need it. They had all the measures in the world that they needed to quell this protest. Mark Mendicino, whatever his last name is, lied in questioning, in saying that the RCMP specifically asked for it. Lied about there being threats of a certain type of assault of a sexual nature on women walking around Ottawa, like the truckers were just walking around groping people as though they're as though there's someone else who was accused of groping a reporter back in 2000 and apologized for it, that being Justin Trudeau. So anyways, they're having the hearing now. It's not going to go well. It's not a coincidence, although maybe it is, but it's not. At this time, they're compiling evidence. They're compiling websites to document the protests, to show how peaceful they truly were, how absolutely unnecessary invoking the Emergencies Act was, how absolutely abusive it was, how absolutely shredding of the very fabric of Canadian society its impact was. Fox says RCMP. No, that was United Nations soldiers. I saw those rumors, can't substantiate them, but I know that I saw RCMP, Sudbury Police. What is it called in Quebec? Sûreté de Québec, OPP. You had like multiple branches of police in Ottawa with stun grenades, with batons, pepper spray, snipers on roofs, drones in the sky, armored vehicles. Justin Trudeau comes out and lectures Iran on violently cracking down on peaceful protests with an emphasis on abusing female protesters. Oh my goodness.